We're about to witness the greatest miracle of the machine age.
The Gentle Rebel Podcast.
I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you enjoy it. I think you will.
So I am joined on the Gentle Rebel podcast this week by Cindy Gale, who is a psychotherapist, certified transactional analyst, and a facilitator of the Work That Reconnects, which I'm really excited to explore with her today. It's great to have you with me, Cindy. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for the invitation, Andy. I'm really excited to be here and really looking forward to our chat today.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, we sort of met online a little while ago and had a chat, and loads of stuff in common, like the high sensitivity and interest in transactional analysis that I have, and I know you're an expert in. And then we were also talking about active hope and this work that reconnects. And I read the book Active Hope: How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy by Joanna, Macy and Chris Johnston a few years ago, and I was really struck by the sort of the freshness of it and how it felt like a really uplifting and engaging way to approach this rapidly changing world that we're in, and to do that without sort of disappearing off the deep end into hopelessness and all of that sort of stuff, and despair and everything. It's great to meet someone who's actually involved in teaching this stuff. So I thought, gotta use this to spread this and learn more about it myself. So I'd love to know a little bit about how you got involved in this work and what it means to you, just to start with, maybe.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, how did I get involved in this work? It probably starts with, childhood, as most things do. I think, I've heard this sort of similar experience from many HSPs, that they were, being a very sensitive child. And I was acutely aware as a kid of the living world around. I lived in the countryside, the living world around me. My dad was very much a sort of country man, and hunting, a shooting and a fishing man, and taught me how to shoot and fish when I was about 5 years old. I think I was about 6 or 7. And I asked the question one day at the dinner table, where do these sausages come from? And my parents said, well, they come from pigs, and I'd seen lots of pigs on the local farm, all free range pigs, because it was the bucolic days back in then. And I was absolutely horrified. And I remember crying. I remember saying, I can't eat any animal ever again. I think my parents thought I was being a bit hysterical and I'd get over it, but I never did. I never did. So thank goodness I had very kind parents, because I've heard similar stories from other people who've been forced to, don't be so ridiculous, you're going to eat meat. So I think that sort of feeling for the land around me, for the animals around me, for all beings, whether they're sentient beings, whether they're not sentient beings, or the living world around me, I was acutely attuned with when I was a kid. And then I think growing up, I got involved in a lot of activism in my teens. And then I got to a point where I think I was working in corporate world. And then I thought, I'm not really connecting with people like me. I need to find more people like me. And then I stumbled across, no, they say no, there's nothing random in this world, but I stumbled across the Work That Reconnects. This was in 2008, I think it was 2008, 2009. And I went along to a workshop. First workshop was with Chris Johnston, who's the co-author with Joanna, Macy of Active Hope, and then just absolutely fell in love with the work. And then about a year later, Joanna was coming over to the UK, and she was doing an intensive training for facilitators. So I thought, I have to be there. So I did that with Joanna in 2009, I think it was. And then the rest is history. I've been facilitating the work and teaching other people how to facilitate the work ever since.
Oh, fantastic.
Very long answer,
Yeah.
but hopefully that's
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that sort of backstory for
yeah.
you from childhood and then sort of leading into that. And yeah, that's great. So, yeah, we were just talking before we started recording about the welcome that you use to sort of bring people into the work when you're training and facilitating those workshops. And yeah, we were talking about whether that might be a nice place to start here. So
If people are listening to this podcast and they're listening to it on their own and they want to go through some of the practices, which I'm going to explain, I'm going to share some of the practices so that people can do that. It's a really nice way of sort of centering yourself in the work and bringing everything together and really, so I would definitely advise, lighting a candle, make yourself really comfy as you're listening to this, and just get yourself generally in the right place. It's probably worth starting with the purpose of the work, whether it's active hope and work that reconnects. So work that reconnects sort of came first, and then which Joanna and Molly Brown developed, and then Chris Johnson and Joanna Macy wrote the book Active Hope, and they're based on the work that reconnects. So they're sort of interchangeable but slightly different.
all right.
So the purpose of the work is to help all of us humans get in touch with our emotional responses to whatever's happening in the world. And people are increasingly calling this the poly crisis. It's not, it's climate breakdown, it's cost of living crisis, it's wars, it's dictatorships, it's various different things are happening all around the world at the same time, and it feels very heavy. And for HSPs, and particularly HSPs who are in touch with their sort of wider empathic self, it can feel really heavy, it can feel really, really tough. So it's really important to get the support around you of like-minded people. And this work is very much about getting in touch with your emotions. Now, it's not about debating things. It's not about going into your head and debating whether this is right or this approach is right. So it's not about solutions. It's not about debating the facts. It's purely about experiencing what you're experiencing, helping you to experience what you're experiencing in your body, in all of you. And, in our society, we don't really like to talk about emotions very much. It's a bit, most people haven't had the training in, what are my emotions? How do I know where they are? How do I feel them? How do I get in touch with them deeply? Why would I want to do that in the first place? Chris Johnson writes about this process called adversity activated development. And it's come from a lot of scientific studies with refugees, that if you don't talk about stuff, it just gets worse and worse and worse in your own head. If you actually talk about stuff and you learn how to process emotions, and you do it particularly with other people, which I know for many people is scary, but you do it with other people that you trust in a sort of safe enough space, it can actually be incredibly liberating and also build your inner resources much, much better than if you hadn't talked about it. So it's counterintuitive because we think, oh, let's not go there, let's not talk about this, or I've got nobody in my family who's anywhere interested in climate breakdown, or there's nobody in my family who's interested in what's happening in the Middle East or Syria, or any number of 100, lots of other countries. So people tend to keep it to themselves, but it's really, really important because it's part of actually building your own resources, building your own inner strength. So this is a welcome that we do at the beginning of the work, this is many different ways. Lots of different people start in many different ways, but I particularly like this welcome that we do at the beginning, and it's known as the Canticle Farm welcome. We would like to welcome all beings that inhabit Earth, human or otherwise, the two-legged, the four-legged, the winged and finned, those who walk, fly, crawl above the ground and below, in air and in water. We would like to welcome people on all parts of the continuum of gender identity and sexual expression: lesbian, gay, bisexual, heterosexual, transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, genderqueer, and two-spirit people, and all other queer folk, the sexually active and the celibate, and everyone for whom these labels don't apply. People of African descent, of Asian descent, of European descent, of First Nations descent, in this land and other lands. People of mixed and multiple descents, and of all language spoken here. We'd like to welcome your bodies and bodies of all shapes and sizes, of all abilities and challenges, those living with a chronic medical condition, visible or invisible. We welcome people of all ages, those about to be born, the voices of children, all elder bodies, all pregnant bodies, all menstruating bodies, and those who are currently bleeding. Your ceremony is honoured here. We welcome people who identify as activists and those who don't. Mystics, believers, non-believers, seekers of all kinds, those who practice the old ways, all ancient and enduring earth-honouring traditions, witches, pagans, pantheists, and wild creatures, all believers, and all those who support us to be here today. We welcome your emotions: joy, fear, grief, contentment, disappointment, surprise, outrage, anger, and all else that flows through you. We welcome your families, genetic and otherwise, those dear to us who have died. Please say their names. Say their names out loud. We welcome our ancestors and future ones, the ancestors who lived in this land, in this place where these buildings are now, and their descendants who still do. And if you know the ancestors that lived on your land, please say their names. We honour you through this work that we are undertaking. We welcome all the plants, the green beings, the grasses, the herbs, the flowers, the shrubs, the tall trees from all places, the ash, the redwood, the oak, the pine, the cedar, the willow, the cypress, the yew, the trees from the rainforests and the trees from the swamps, the river bottoms and deserts, and also the wonderful companions, the mushrooms, the fungi that enrich and hold your soil and decompose your bodies to enhance earth. We welcome all non-material beings of this place and all places, beings of the wind, the forest, the desert, the oceans, as well as this particular place, whether it's still intact and wild or domesticated and paved. We welcome you with the names the ancestors gave to this place, and with these names by which you know yourselves. We welcome all.
It's very nice, yeah. Grounding universal acceptance of all, yeah.
Acknowledging difference and also acknowledging similarities. I think that's the, that's the key point. Acknowledging all difference and all similarities at the same time. It's the, the concept in TA, we have this concept of both and, not either or, but both and.
Yeah.
Both things are true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, great place to start and enter this, the work, the ideas associated with this, and as you said before, that kind of stepping out of the mind as well, and we can be so busy in our thoughts and overthinking and analyzing this versus this, and actually that's a great anchoring place to begin. This is beyond the cognitive in that sense. And I suppose the three stories might be a good place to begin. It strikes me that is where a lot of it starts. That's where the book kind of enters. So could you sort of take us through those stories? And
I think why the three stories of our time, they're known as the three stories of our time. And obviously this is just one take. This is just, one take on what's going on at the moment. But I think why this is so powerful is because many people feel hopeless, feel despairing, don't know what to do. I think one of the things that the Work That Reconnects Active Hope does is it gives people a framework to understand the world and what's going on, this sort of craziness of what's going on in the world. It gives people a framework, which is, I think, can be quite settling. It can be a bit more settling than if you don't know what on earth is going on and you can't make sense of the world. I hear people say many times, I don't understand what's going on. It's just crazy, What's going on? So I think actually to give people a bit of a framework and let them interpret it in their way. So, people listening to this can, might take whatever you need from this. You can discard, 80% of it if that's right. But if you take something that is useful from this. So the three stories of our time, just going to read a little quote out from Joanna Macy, first of all. So this is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it's natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel or the anger you feel, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. She talks about the three stories, and the three stories are, number one is business as usual. So business as usual is that we are living in the middle of what we used to think of as a success story. We can have strawberries in January flown in from Peru, or lamb from New Zealand if you're a meat eater, lamb from New Zealand flown in at any time of the year. We can fly all over the world, we can plan a future, and it's a story that views economic and technological success as developments that make our life easier. And we're constantly looking for progress. We're constantly looking for how we can move things forward and progress. So that encapsulates business as usual. The second story is called The Great Unraveling. So the Great Unraveling is, it's already too late. The die is cast. It's all completely overwhelming and depleting. Our natural resources are being depleted. Climate change is leading to climate collapse and superstorms and excessive flooding and excessive fires, and the rich are getting richer, everyone else is getting poorer. And there are multitudes of very poor people, particularly global south, very poor people who are starving. Species are going extinct. War is big business. Where's it going? So that's second story, The Great Unraveling. And the third story, Joanna calls The Great Turning. And she calls it the essential adventure of our time. It's a story because it's a story that can energize and enliven. It's a story of living in the present and engaging with life fully to the best of our abilities and making a difference to the world as it is today. And this third story has a much larger and much longer view context, that we don't know what actions we do today that may actually make a huge difference in 20 years time, 50 years time, 500 years time. And it's one of the reasons why Chris and Joanna called the book Active Hope, because in the sort of activist community, the word hope is often a bit tricky, because it can be blind hope. It can be just completely blind hope. But active hope is very much about, you have to make a stand, you have to do something. And whether it's emotional work, whether it's conscious work, whether it's physical work out in the world, whether it's activism, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Everybody's drawn to their own thing. But it's not sitting back and going, I hope everything's going to be okay. It's actually how can you be part of this? So the great turning is this idea that we might turn from the sort of the worst bits of the industrial growth society, the worst bits of capitalism, and we might turn that into something life-sustaining society. We might turn it into something else that maybe we don't even have a word for yet, maybe we can't even imagine yet. But in this particular model, there are sort of three things that we need to do to get there. So the first one, and this doesn't mean that everybody has to do all of them. It's like whichever you're called to. This is a very, very broad concept. So whatever you're drawn to, the first one is holding actions. Is basically, and it literally is, it's like holding back the tide of bad stuff that's happening. So whether that's direct activism, whether that's supporting things and thinking about, Médecins Sans Frontières in the war zones. I'm thinking about direct activism. Whatever you need to do as for holding actions to hold back the tide of bad stuff that's happening in wherever it's happening. The second thing is something called Gaian structures, or building new structures. And that's, let's think about those things that we can do, that we can build, that we can fix, that will make tomorrow better for every living being, not just humans, every living being. Because if we don't have the trees and the clean waters and the rocks and the plant life and the animal life, we won't have human life. So we can't just think about human existence. We have to think about the world, the planet. So this is about building new structures. And I'm thinking about things like maybe the Earthshot Prize. That's all about new developments. One thing, there's one trap here is that there's, in this model, there's no technological fix. A lot of people say, oh yeah, no, there'll be a technological fix, we'll all be fine. I think that, I don't think there will be. And I think that's also putting power into the hands of a very small group of a very small people, which is always dangerous. So there's holding actions, there's building new structures or Gaian structures, and the third one is this sort of shift in consciousness, this shift in how we think about ourselves, the shift in our psychology, the shift in how we think about our relationship with ourselves, our other fellow humans, and the more than human world. So those three things together. We need to do all of them, at different times, and different people will be drawn towards different things.
That's a great setup of everything and touching. And the thing that I'm struck by with the stories of our time is the fact that there's a fluidity to the stories that we embody. And I think, it'd be easy to say, oh, that person's living in that story, that person's living in that story, and I live in this story. And actually, just hearing those descriptions, it's like, oh yes, I might spend a couple of hours living in business as usual in the morning, and then in the afternoon I have a existential crisis, and the great unraveling is is happening within me, and everything just feels hopeless and terrible. But then it might be that my state changes as I actually move into a sense of active hope. And I was really drawn into that phrase, active hope. I think it resonated. So somebody sent me or recommended the book after hearing something I'd been talking about, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds spot on. And I really want to know, how do you embody that active hope? Because it isn't that wishful thinking that you were talking about, like the vague hope. And even when you're talking about those technological solutions that might be presented, and that in itself is a story that we might step into, like, oh, someone will fix this, everything will be okay because someone, the adults will come along and help us all. And I think if there's one thing we've seen over the past decade or so, it's like, oh, there aren't any adults. And that, it's one of the things that's really struck me about a lot of the power structures that we have at the moment is no one really knows what they're doing. And that's both scary, but also that presents an opportunity for us to change that story.
Wouldn't it be refreshing if everybody said, actually, I don't really know what I'm doing, but let's see if we can figure this out together. Let's see if we can figure this out together.
Yeah.
Now, I know that might terrify some people, but actually it's the reality. It's the reality. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And so there's the spiral, which is related to the Great Turning as well, which has I think it's gratitude, honoring our pain, seeing with new eyes, and going forth. So it's this, I guess it's a grounding and then a moving through, and then the active part at the end of this spiral, which I love images of spirals rather than linear conceptions of progress. I suppose it's like the spiral, the rhythm, the season, like those kinds of things are really important. So yeah, it'd be great to maybe focus on that, unless there's something else that you want to.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think that was the sort of all the things to understand the context of the work, I think. And the spiral is the actual practice, the set of practices. And yeah, it's drawn as a spiral because time, the idea of time, the concept of time plays a critical part in the Work That Reconnects, active hope. And and you don't just do this practice once, you do it, you carry on doing it, and maybe you even make it into a daily or weekly practice, who knows. I just want to read one more quote, actually. It's so I talked a little bit about the purpose of this work is so that it's not about head work. This is very much about emotion work. It's very much about soul work, about body work to a certain extent. And Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh was once asked, "What do we most need to do to save our world?" His questioners, of course, expected him to identify the best strategies to pursue in social and environmental action, etc. But his answer was, "What we most need to do is to hear within ourselves the sound of the earth crying." I've shared that quote so many times, and every time I share it, I still feel, oh, just really gets me. What we most need to do is to hear within ourselves the sound of the earth crying. That means everybody else on the earth. That means every creature on the earth. That means every tree, every river, every fish, everything. So the work does bring up powerful emotions, and it brings them up so that you can become familiar with them, so that you can. It's a bit like an exercise in real emotional understanding and how it impacts you. And the power of the work is doing it with other people. Really powerful to do it with other people, because then you get to find out that there are so many people that actually feel about this stuff, feel deeply about this stuff, and actually want to make their contribution in whatever way they can, in their way. So going back to the spiral always starts with gratitude. I mean, this is Joanna says it, but it's a lot of her work comes from Buddhist philosophy. Is that she talks about gratitude as a revolutionary act. Because if you think about capitalism and the world that we live in, everything is about selling something. Everything is about commoditizing something to sell it. And we're in that selling, there's this promise that somehow our anxiety about whatever it is going to be alleviated. We need this new hair product, or we need this new face de-wrinkler cream because it's going to make me look 5 years younger, or whatever, and therefore it will alleviate my anxiety about my increasing wrinkles or saggy bits or whatever. And that's what capitalism's based on. It's absolutely based on making helping us to feel anxious helping us to feel anxious so that we'll go and buy more stuff. So if you think about it in that context, gratitude is a revolutionary act, because it's like, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for the wrinkles and the bags and the saggy bits. I'm grateful for the food I have on the table. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for the garden that I have. I'm grateful for, it really is a revolutionary act. That's why gratitude, daily gratitude practices are so important, so important. So we don't get caught up in this sort of maelstrom of consumerist anxiety. For people listening to this on their own, you can do this exercise. You can do this first exercise in gratitude. These are called open sentences on gratitude. So question number 1, what are some things that I love about being alive on Earth? I'm gonna rush through these a minute because I know we've got limited time, but take a good 5 minutes, 10 minutes to think about each question and write them down. Next question. A place that was magical or wonderful to me as a child was. Next question. A person who helped me believe in myself is or was. Question 4. Some things I enjoy doing and making are. And the last question, question number 5. Some things I appreciate about myself are. So that's a really simple exercise. Open sentences on gratitude. In fact, most of the work that reconnects you can do in these simple, really open, simple open sentences. At a workshop, or when we, if we had longer, we do much more experiential exercises. We do some moving around the room, some body work, some breathing work, some sharing together. But this is the simplest way of approaching it, is through open sentences. What did you think about those sentences, those open sentence questions?
Really appreciate that it's like a doorway to an expansive energy or spirit. I often talk about sort of the creative spirit, kind of entering that inner creative sound and voice, and it really connects with that and timelessness. The childhood. What was the wording of that one?
A place that was magical or wonderful to me as a child was.
Yeah. And that sort of the wonder, the awe, the mystery that is very childlike, and the way that you see the world through those childlike eyes. Yeah, it's a really nice way to think or to approach what is actually urgency and scarcity. And you can easily get in, if you enter this stuff through that door of like acting now, doing stuff now, then you end up potentially tying the wrong things too tight and getting all worked up in the wrong way. And actually, just taking that moment to enter through this door, it's like, okay, I'm receptive, I'm open, and any hostility I might be feeling, or urgency, scarcity, just sort of flutters away.
Yeah, lovely, beautiful. Yeah, thank you for mentioning scarcity. I'd forgotten about that sort of, the idea of the scarcity mindset versus the abundant mindset. So that's absolutely, that's a key point as well. Key point to how do we move towards having an abundant mindset, even if we don't have very much, how can we move towards that?
Yeah, and that's the idea of, within capitalism, you turn contradiction into opposition. Essentially, you turn those parts of us that are contradictory, and there's just this natural non-wholeness and completeness that is part of being human. It's part of life, and it's why we have language and why we can't quite say what we mean perfectly and all of that sort of stuff. And how capitalism, by its nature, wants us to turn that feeling into an oppositional position where you think you can stop the contradiction, or like if you get that, buy that thing, or believe in this sort of utopian idealism and strive towards it, then that's going to make everything okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. It comes back to the fundamentals of this, the that sort of capitalist thinking, but also I couldn't help thinking when you were talking just then. I was thinking about the Disney idea of relationships. That there's one prince or one princess that will come along and they will fulfill our every need. Because we've ultimately been seduced into thinking that there is this one omnipresent being that will take care of all our needs. But I was thinking about the either or versus the both and again, because that what you described in that way of thinking is very much either or. It's either this or it's that.
Yeah.
It's very binary. Whereas actually what we're talking about here and what we have been talking about is the both and.
Yeah.
It's the both and. It's really, really important point. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and coming back to that exercise as well, that openness and expansive thing, it kind of takes me away from, that somebody's going to come and rescue us. Someone knows what they're doing. Someone's going to provide the answer to all of this stuff. And to instead enter into this, okay, we're going to work this out together. And that is a compelling prospect rather than a really chaotic prospect, even though there is chaos in that. There's negotiations, and there's different people have different ideas around stuff, and that's okay, and there's room for that.
Collaboration rather than competition.
Absolutely.
So the sort of first stop on the spiral is gratitude, and then we go straight from gratitude to honoring our pain for the world. And this is deep grief work. It's deep grief work, and it's something that why I often say to people, why would you go to a workshop that's all about grief and all about pain and all about suffering? Well, because actually if we it's various ways that you can do it, but if you don't, it sort of always stays there. It always stays as some sort of, and then it hardens, and then it stays as some sort of hard lump in your body that you're sort of semi-aware of and not quite aware of. And it also leaks out at often really inopportune times when you're least expecting it. It will leak out, when your responses to something are completely disproportionate, then that something that you've been holding on to is leaking out, whether it's anger, whether it's grief, whether it's so in workshops we usually spend probably a good third to a half of the time of the workshop on this stage, because this is such an important stage, and you need time to get into it. You really need time to get into feeling your pain for the world. For this sort of little self-guided version, we're going to do some more open sentences. So open sentences on honoring our pain. Number 1. What concerns me most about our world is, and as I said, you wouldn't rush through these, as I'm doing them fairly speedily here, but for time, you'd really take your time and feel into them. Question number 2. What I find hard about this moment in my life on this planet is. What I find hard is. Question number 3. So feeling about this, the emotions I carry around with me are. And question number 4. Ways I avoid these feelings are. And question number 5. Some ways I can use these feelings are.
Again, I'm struck by that, the accessing the creativity within us and the giving us permission to feel what it is that we feel, and to respond to the things that actually matter to us as individuals as well. I think that with that first question especially, I was like, oh yeah, there's something really profound about being allowed to think for yourself. What is it that I find hard? What is it that I struggle with about the world? And it doesn't have to be something that someone else struggles with. I don't, and I think, with highly sensitive people, it's probably a really refreshing thing and quite powerful thing to come to your own, okay, I'm not people pleasing, or I'm not thinking from the perspective of someone. It's like, how am I feeling about this? And a song lyric just came into my mind as you're talking about sort of grief. I think it's Stephen Wilson Jr. There's a line in one of his songs, which is, grief is only love that's got nowhere to go. And I just think it's such a beautiful idea, because it's
Absolutely
like,
beautiful. Yeah.
it's, and then what this is doing is opening up that door to let that grief, where does that grief want to go? Where can that grief go as it sort of flows with that creative spirit in you? And so turning that grief into something, without denying it and without getting rid of it. It's like, where can that grief, that love go?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So the next part of the spiral is called Seeing with New Eyes. And this is about perspective shifting and seeing things from multiple different perspectives. I'm just going to read out a little bit about my sort of synopsis that I sometimes use, to explain this stage. So this is very much about shifting our perspective in how we see the world and how we see ourselves in the world, and different ways of understanding power and power dynamics. So this is a way of almost like reframing the industrial growth society or capitalism, because all the writers in this space talk about how the global crisis is at root, it's a crisis in perception, that there's not a technological fix, it's actually a crisis of perception. So this stage is very much about shifting your perception. And there are some wonderful experiential exercises that we do at this stage, but I'm just going to read out this sort of, the way of reframing. So the industrial growth society can't be sustained. It's destroying the biological and ecological systems on which all life depends. And the points about that are, one of the points about that is this belief in unlimited economic growth. Well, the reality is that nothing in the universe grows endlessly without limits. We can't have unlimited economic growth. That's just not possible. Point number 2 is about maximizing profit. When one variable in a system, e.g. profit, consistently trumps all others, the system can't stay in balance. It goes into overshoot and eventually heads towards collapse. So currently we measure profit most of the time as the one key variable, which is just completely skewing everything else. The third point is about externalizing costs and blocking feedback. In order to maximize profits, the ecological and human costs of production are offloaded onto third parties, such as taxpayers and the natural world. This distorts both the perceptions and accounting of a corporation's impact. It blocks the feedback that any system needs in order to know the effects of its behavior. Incapacity to receive and register feedback is ultimately suicidal. I appreciate this is quite dense stuff and it's quite heady stuff, but I was struggling to think of exercises to bring in for the Seeing with New Eyes, because normally we would do this as a big experiential exercise and we'd move around the room, but hopefully this gives you an idea of reframing and some of the issues that we're facing. Number 4 is about top-down power. The worldview underlying the industrial growth society sees reality in terms of separate identities which are linear, hierarchical, and competitive in relation to each other. Hence, power has been understood as power over and win-lose, an assumption that breeds insatiable wants. So now we perceive once again the interdependence of all things, and building on our understanding, we can shift our understanding of this so that power is understood as mutual and synergistic, arising from interactions, arising from collaboration. A life-sustaining economy does not alter the integrity and balance of the natural systems. The goal of economic activity is not the profit of a few, but sufficiency for all now and to the future. And feedback is essential for accessing the true cost of our behaviours and our responsibility for any harm they occur. Humans are seen as both unique and inseparable from our matrix, the web of life. Our genuine self-interest includes that of other beings and the living body of the earth. So yeah,
That's
bit
useful
more,
stuff.
bit more heady, but at least it's about that shift of perception, and again putting a framework around things so that people that are just completely baffled by life on earth as it is today can actually start to get a handle on, oh, okay, that's why this is happening, and that's why this is going, and that's why, and that's what we can do about it, that's what I can do about it in my my own little way.
Yeah, and it's taking those concepts that are often presented as sort of timeless universal truths and saying it doesn't have to be that way. These are systems and structures that have been devised by people, generally people who benefit from them, and that trajectory of the lineage of people benefiting from them. And we could find new ways to do this if we're open to that and creative in our thinking and collaborative rather than competitive, and bring on those values of, okay, what actually matters beyond the profit and that skewed part of the whatever we're measuring success by, and change what we measure success by based on what matters, what we decide together matters to us.
So the last part of the spiral is called going forth. So after we've done this work and we've spent most of the time on honoring our pain, because that's that's a big part, we do going forth. And I've got some questions. We often do this, often do it as questions, but we do it in pairs. And it's we get the one person to write down the answers that the other person has given, so that the person doesn't have to think and write at the same time. So this is going forth in terms of your callings, what your calling is and what resources you need. So I quite like to think about it in terms of calling and resources. So question number one, and I'll, for the sake of time, I'll go through these fairly quickly. There's 7 questions. Question number one, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do in service to life on earth? So this is our chance to pull out all the stops, think big with no ifs or buts getting in the way. Question number 2, in pursuing this vision, what particular project do you feel called to undertake, no matter how big, no matter how small? And this might be a new direction of things that you're already doing. It might be something entirely new. This is your opportunity to get specific. Think in terms of what might be accomplished in, say, a year's time, or might be well underway in a year's time. And it doesn't matter how tiny it is or how huge it is, just something. Question number 3, what resources, inner and outer, do you have now that will help you to do that? So inner resources include talents and strengths of character, as well as the knowledge and the skills that you've acquired. External resources might include relationships or contacts, networks that you can draw on. Not to forget things like babysitters, rich relatives, computer savvy friends, as well as your location, employment, money in the bank, and any of your other own resources. Question number 4. What resources, inner and outer, will you need to acquire to follow your calling? What will you need to learn, or what will you need to gather? It might be something like assertiveness training, might be something like learning how to get grants, it might be contacts within organizations that you currently don't have, it might be any support that you need that you don't currently have. And again, this doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be a really small, discrete thing. Question number 5. How much do you stop yourself? What obstacles might you throw in your way? We all have our familiar patterns of self-doubt and self-sabotage. Question number 6. How will you move through and around these obstacles? And last question. What can you do in the next week, no matter how small the step, if only a phone call, that will move you along this path? And that's the going forth questions, which is the last stage of the spiral. And
That's
again,
great,
we
yeah.
do going forth in many, many different ways in a workshop, but that's a simple sort of questions for people to think about.
Yeah, there's coaching like esque questions there and I really like the so that idea of vocation being something from within rather than something or calling even, because we often can get stuck in the trap of thinking that a calling is something to find out there somewhere. And actually coming back to, it's saying about the permission to feel the world and to see things, to honor your pain, and to actually let that be yours, and then to see with those new eyes, and to then think, what is it that I want to be part of changing myself, and then that calling to be that. It's nothing huge, or like it doesn't need to be this big epiphany. It's like, actually, no, that's there. That's that thing that you feel and connect with when you're just for me it's like, probing that sense of what matters. Oh yeah, that is something I really want to be part of changing and creating something new within. Like that's that calling, that's that sense of little quiet voice within.
Lovely, it is. And for many HSPs, particularly, you've got busy lives, you're working, you've got kids, you've got family. If it's busy, you have to create the space for that, don't you? You can't just pluck it out of yourself and go, oh, here it is, it's this thing. It's
Absolutely,
like, no, you need time and you need space, and often you need solitude. Often you need a mixture actually of solitude and also working with other people on this to help, because often other people can see your gifts that you're not very good at seeing yourself. Often other people can see the things in you and pull them out and go, how about this? Or how about that
totally.
one? How about this one? Yeah.
And I was going to say, actually, that's one of the things that's really struck me is the oscillation between the personal and the collective, and how because it's again very easy to like read something like Active Hope, or to sort of hear about this stuff and to go into your own little atomized shell and to think, what do I need to do to make the change that's necessary, and actually that's a recipe for hopelessness eventually, because it's like, yes, you can make a surprisingly big difference as an individual, but you also can't really, and you don't need to, and there's that collaborative bit, and as you said, like doing this in a collective, in a community, is a really powerful thing, both in terms of, I imagine, that moving beyond the loneliness and the isolation that you might feel, but also, as you say, to have those blind spots shown to you, the things that you might not appreciate about yourself. And blind spots not just being sort of weaknesses that you don't see, but like the strengths, the things that people see are alive in you, that you might not recognize for yourself, and it just draws that stuff further out of you. And so I think I was going to sort of ask about that community side, and I know you do a lot of stuff with highly sensitive people. You've got a HSP Connect community sort of hub network thing.
Thank you. Yes.
And I'd love to hear any thoughts on what I've just said, but also
I think reflecting on what you've just said, I think it goes back to the both and again, doesn't it? It goes back to the both and. As highly sensitive people, we need time on our own. We need solitude, absolutely solitude, silence, stillness. We absolutely need that. And then we need the connection time, but with the right type of, ideally with other highly sensitive people, or, people that are not going to drain us too much. So it's the both and. It's like I need time alone and I need connection, and then I need time alone and I need the connection. It's both and. Absolutely. So yes, no, thank you for mentioning HSP Connect. So I'm a psychotherapist. I see people individually, and I work with couples, and I work with sometimes family groups and groups as well. And I've also been running opportunities for HSPs to get together for probably about the last 12 years or so. So in-person gatherings. So I run something called the HSP Cafes. We just had one in central London last Saturday. So I'm trying to do a balance of in-person ones and also online ones. So I also do a monthly Zoom sort of listening circle. It's a sort of facilitated listening circle for HSPs to get together, get to know each other, and that's people can drop into that. That's not, you don't have to be part of anything. And then last year, so it's been running about a year, I set up something called HSP Connect. It's a subscription membership site it's basically like a social media platform for HSPs, but it's it's moderated, facilitated. There's all the things that you would expect, but it's specifically for HSPs. So the first thing that you see on it is I'm hoping this is going to be true with the new app as well. You see a map, you see a Google map, and you see lots of pins, and that's where the HSPs are. You can identify where they are, although it doesn't, it's not exact location, but so it's a way for people to meet other HSPs, and I do some facilitated things within that as well. It's basically for friendship, because I think we have a bit of a crisis of friendship, where people are, deeply invested in the care and support of each other. And I'd like to rekindle that.
Yeah, that's great. That does seem like the heart of, like, with the cafe. And that's the cafes are just UK based.
Cafes are UK based at the moment. Yeah. I mean, I'm very, very happy to do some elsewhere if people want to step forward and say, hey, I'd love to run a cafe in somewhere else. And I have got, I've got people in other parts of the UK that I'm offering some training, free training in how to set up a cafe and how to do this for yourself.
Great. Well, do encourage people to go and check all of that out. And I think it is so important, that connection and proper friendships being built and nurtured. And that actually makes such a big difference.
It does.
Kind of resonates with what we've been talking about as well. And I think it's all part of that wider dealing with the stuff that we are dealing with in our world at the moment. So Cindy, I really appreciate you taking the time and going through this in the way that you have. It's I know people are going to find that really valuable, and I think it can continue something we can come back to and keep using.
Yeah, absolutely.
Future,
And absolutely. There's lots of resources there, and lots of self-resources as well. And really, really, really appreciate you inviting me on here, Andy. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Appreciate your insights and your wisdom as well.
Thank you.